Today on Mish Men, we're going to talk about the progressive era and have we seen any progress? We've got Tony Moffatt, the guest. And welcome back to Mish Men, everyone. We missed you last week, but I had some travel, couldn't make it into the studio to record, and Dusty's been wrapped up in work, so completely get that. So this week, I have with me now a familiar face, and we'll just drop the guest business. You are an aperiodic co-host. We'll say it that way.
Still impersonating a co-host.
Still impersonating. So welcome back, Tony.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And last week we talked to John Allen, and I don't know if you got a chance to listen to that, but it was a good podcast. Good get to know John and what he does professionally, because I've seen him around here for years. And this week we're going to talk about progressivism. So what it is, what it's purported to be, and what the fruits of it are, and how that differs with our constitutional republic. And it's one of those things, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about this later, but it's this, it runs counter to it completely, because our constitutional republic is set up as the individual is the one whose rights that we are most concerned about, the individual, whereas progressivism, the assumption is, well, we have a group, and we need to make group decisions, and that always leads to disaster, and that's what history tells us, and that's probably what we're going to get into.
Indeed.
So progressivism, it's the idea that you're going to organize and structure your society so that you can make progress towards this ideal state. That's about as generous a definition as I can give. And I don't know, do you have an alternate definition?
An alternate definition for progressivism, it is the overthrow, I would say, of that individual idea in favor of the collective idea, and you really have to applaud them using the word progress in the term in order to progress toward what? You really have to ask the question. What are we progressing towards?
Right.
If we are progressing indeed under progressivism.
Yeah. And the how I'll frame our conversation today, and you and I had talked about this beforehand, but just so the listeners clued in, this is the instantiation of progressivism in the United States, and in some regards, how it kind of leached out into the other areas, and it's related to fascism, and we'll talk a little bit about fascism later. It's a favorite topic of mine, and a lot of this whole stuff, we've nibbled at that cookie just when you and I talked, and when we talk during our vaunted breakfasts. Maybe we should invite the listener to join our
have breakfast.
Yeah. And progressivism, but it's all of the kind of progressivism that these tendencies aren't new, but it really got its feet underneath itself in the early years of the mid 1800s. But then it really came to bear late 1800s, early 1900s, and then out. And we'll talk about whether we see it today, and if that's still alive and well. So anyway, I'll turn it over to you because you had some.
I do. I have a quiz for you, Adam.
All right.
Because I like to ask you hard questions and put you on the spot. It's actually my favorite part about podcasting, I think, is getting you backed into the corner here. So
I enjoy it.
I'm about to do that.
I am in a round room though, so.
Oh, okay, very good. Well, I'll see if I can find a corner here. I want to give you a quiz. I'm going to read you some quotes, and I want you to tell me if you can tell me who the famous figure is that I'm quoting. All of these quotes are the same person.
Okay, so I'll wait till the end.
So wait till the end, and then I have a couple of fun facts that I can give you there, and we can continue to talk. But what I am going back to, so here's your first clue. I'm going back to the beginning of modern, what we'll call modern progressivism. You mentioned that in the early 1800s, these thoughts started to emerge and things got underway. We fought a whole civil war in the middle of the 1800s. and then later on, these ideas reemerged and began to find their way into American politics and actually American process and some changes in the structure of the republic. And so I want to go back to that point where we are getting into the modern era of progressivism, what I'll call it, and see if you can tell me who this is. So, quote, "Segregation is not a humiliation, but a benefit, and ought to be so regarded by you gentlemen." This is our topic, a person speaking to a civil rights leader in the early part of the 20th century. Here's another one, quote, "If the colored people made a mistake in voting for me, they ought to correct it." There's a big hint in there. Here's another quote, "The domestic slaves and almost all who were much under the master's eye were happy and well cared for." And this is explaining how things were in the pre-Civil War era for slaves, particularly black slaves in the United States. That quote was made in the 20th century, so well after the Civil War, 50 years or more. Quote, "The whole temper and tradition of Princeton University is such that no Negro has ever applied for admission, and it seems unlikely that the question will ever assume practical form." So there's some connection with Princeton University there.
Right.
Quote,
I think I'm starting to see it.
You're starting to see through this. Blacks weren't the only ones that got the attention of our subject. Here's a quote. "In the matter of the Chinese and Japanese coolie immigration, I stand for the national policy of exclusion. We cannot make a homogeneous population out of people who do not blend with the Caucasian race." Now, in our modern era, that will, like I said earlier, take paint off the walls, for a lot of people.
We might have to bleep some of this stuff out.
Exactly. I'm about to get us canceled here. But, he didn't keep it just to blacks and Asians. He had plenty for whites as well, if they were the wrong kind of whites. And here's a quote. "It's as if the countries of the south of Europe were disburdening themselves of the more sordid and hapless elements of their population." Talking about immigrants to the United States, the Ellis Island populations that came through. And so this person is widely vaunted as a top 20, top 25% best by many modern authors in his particular area of expertise. He's a top 20, top 25% regularly, is regularly lauded as the father of modern progressivism, and is the only one of these who is actually buried in the U.S. National Cathedral. Who am I talking about?
Let's see.
And you may have to go all the way back to your days in Washington, D.C.,
maybe so.
In your rock drills at the National Cathedral.
So could it be Woodrow Wilson?
Ding, ding, ding.
Okay.
It could exactly be Woodrow Wilson.
So I don't know if you could pick up my acting skills.
Not very well.
So Tony and I share a mutual distaste for
Deep disgust.
Woodrow Wilson. And he's one of those characters that a lot of details get glossed over like those. And also the fruits of some of the changes that he really pushed hard for. Him and his wife when he had a stroke, and she was basically the president. So anyway, Woodrow Wilson, he's a gem.
Let me put a cherry on top of that for you. Do you know that Woodrow Wilson actually was very progressive during his tenure in office? The first movie was actually viewed at the White House, was actually projected at the White House.
Oh yeah, what is the name of that movie?
The name of the movie is Birth of a Nation.
Yeah, Birth of a Nation.
Do you recall what the subject of that movie is?
No, go ahead and tell us.
The subject of the movie is a historic and heroic portrayal of the KKK.
Yeah.
And so this was actually Wilson's personal choice for the first movie ever to be screened in the White House, very early days of moving pictures. And so this was the first movie that was ever aired at the White House, ever screened at the White House, and that was by Woodrow Wilson's choice.
It's interesting. There's a lot of, I think, a lot of buildings that are named after him, not only at Princeton. I don't know if Princeton, they might have changed the name because of the kind of The woke are eating themselves. The progressives are now eating themselves. But similar to him, Margaret Sanger, someone that was vaunted as a women's rights proponent, and started Planned Parenthood.
Planned Parenthood, indeed.
And the sole purpose of Planned Parenthood was to rid our culture of the undesirable races, the not only races like African Americans, but also undesirable folks and folks that aren't quite as smart as the rest of us. So that was the underprivileged that was really pushed into their neighborhoods, and that's why those abortion clinics to literally kill children, people. Just like you and me, that's why they pushed it so hard. That was their goal. But she's glossed over it. All of that stuff is glossed over. Even the words that she used on interviews.
Indeed, and she's portrayed as a hero of feminism, modern feminism, a close kindred spirit to progressivism.
Right.
So, I don't want to make this too terribly dark, but in my opinion, it's a dark conversation topic, to be perfectly honest. And so, but it is something that you and I we've spoken about it, we've quipped about it a little bit whenever we've talked before. And so, I know that it's something that you've studied and looked at. There are some areas, that maybe we still see the vestiges of all this going on in life. But I would just like to know, why do you hate progress so much?
Yeah, that's a good question, because clearly I do.
Indeed.
And I talked about it a little bit in the intro. Progressivism is antithetical to the individualism, and when I say individualism, not hermit-like, but the individual's rights reign supreme within a larger body, because that our form of government, where they recognize the rights of the individual as paramount. The reason why that works best is because as soon as you start lumping a group of people together, well, now those individuals, they might have, if you say folks that men that are capable of growing beards, well, now those that can't grow beards, like me, now we're on the outside looking in. Whereas, and they get certain favors and they get to make certain decisions, or they get to choose certain things that maybe I don't. Well, now you're discounting the meritocracy that the framers were prepared to set up a government around, where those that want to work really hard and they want to do whatever it is with their life, the pursuit of happiness, to own property, they can do that. Whereas progressivism that assumes that now we have to make decisions as a group to move towards this ideal, and that means I'm going to sacrifice some of my rights for that safety of progress. And again, I hate that word that they use. They chose that word very carefully. It's been called many things over the years. They called it progressivism, started to fall out of favor, and then they fell in love with the idea of fascism. And fascism came out of Italy around the same time.
It did.
With Mussolini. And Mussolini, and the reason it's an idea of the left and not an idea of like a libertarian or a classical liberal, different than a progressive type liberal. Fasci are bundles of sticks, and those bundles of sticks are stronger together. So the whole idea of that, together we're stronger, that notion runs antithetical to the rights of the individual. And that fascism, everybody was in love with fascism at the time. It was this great thing. Of course, it fell out of favor after World War II, generally speaking.
Because it was strongly associated with the Axis, with the Italians and the Germans, Hitler's fascists, right, and Mussolini's Italians, correct?
Correct. So the National Socialists, or Nazis of Germany, of course, with the Holocaust, that really sold it right there. And then because the Italians were partnered through that Axis relationship they had with the Japanese and the Germans, that it certainly fell out of favor. But Roosevelt was a big proponent of fascism. Herbert Hoover was actually, he was a Republican president, but a lot of his ideas were similar to that ideal of we need to progress and get better as a society. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, this elite, this group of people, like Woodrow Wilson, who was an intellectual before he became president.
Right.
He was president of Princeton University.
Princeton University for about a decade, I believe.
Yeah,
quite a while.
And so those ideas, it wasn't something new. It was a continuation of what had been going on for some time.
And to be fair, if you can, to the people that were involved in all this, there were a lot of ideas of governance and things in the modern era, sort of call it post-industrial revolution. There were a lot of things knocking around, right? So you had communism with the Bolsheviks came out of that. You had the Nazis and the Italians with the fascist type of things. You had the United States with the still at that time Democratic Republic, a federal republic, constitutional republic. I'll get around to the right word here in a minute, right? And so you had all these things, but there were within the United States at this time, right at the turn of the century, there was the Communist Party of the United States. There were organized fascists. There were people who were involved in politics that actually held these views in the ardent sort of way that they were being held in Europe.
Right.
Held in check only, I think, in the United States by the system of governance that had evolved since the revolution in the United States. And so I just say that to say that it's not like these were fringe ideas that just accidentally caught fire somewhere. They were out and held equal sway with other ideas that were out in the public square at the time.
Falling back in line with our previous conversations, these things, they're not new. Not new at all. And I'll ask you a question at the end of this, but about the why. But we have this idea of we need to get better because I observe this problem, and we need to do something about it. We need to drinking's bad, so we need to have a constitutional. Yeah, we need to prohibit people from drinking. Mm-hmm. So that progressive area, they were it's a fervor, and they co-opted religious leaders and religion at large to push that same type of agenda that falls in line with a lot of these Prussian ideas that already permeated over into the U.S. and throughout the world, like the public school system.
Public school system, yeah.
So the public school system, again, this is not to denigrate anybody that's part of that system or that actually works in that.
I'm a product of a public school.
Yeah, me too. And so John Dewey, he's kind of the father of the modern public school system that we have today. He pushed and started a lot of the curricula that school teachers use today. We need to be less interested in facts and figures and more interested in pushing ideas. And so now the state starts to assume the role of the parent.
And so one thing that I want to point out about that, to go back, is that I think that's probably one of the, if we started to list out in progressivism, what are sort of like key tenets of progressivism, as opposed to the individualism that you were talking about. And I think thing number one would be the inherent right of the government to interfere with somebody's personal life. Mm-hmm. I think tenet number one of progressivism is that there is an inherent right of the collective through the actions of the government to interfere with the individual rights of a person at large in the society. So I just wanted to point that out as you were talking along about and the other thing is you've got all these things you've said, just in your statement there, talking about the Prussian system that gave us our public schools. They had a reason for doing that. Talking about people like John Dewey, we could probably spend weeks on this, and we never have any more listeners left, probably. But
probably not. There might be one or two that like this sort of thing. We'll see.
But the point is that there's so many little things that you can go along and sort of tease out that they could be their own episode about. This is a product of the modern progressive era that we deal with today. So back to you.
Yeah. So spot on, and those little spinoffs, and that lends itself to, it's human nature to bend this way. It's human nature for folks that might have a certain amount of influence or cachet in intellectual circles that want to improve things. And they want to see the plight of someone that's not as fortunate as they are to help them. Well, we need to do something. We need to restructure our society. We need to fix this. And so... I think the guy that coined the term was Friedrich Hayek, famed Austrian economist, along with Ludwig von Mises.
Von Mises.
Yeah. Quick sidebar. Did you know that von Mises had a brother, and his equations are used in like structural dynamics analysis?
I did not know that.
So no kidding. No, this is a rabbit
Brilliant
trail.
guys, yeah.
I love von Mises. I've read a lot of his stuff, as well as Hayek and the Austrian School of Economics, the quote unquote Austrian School of Economics. And I'm in a meeting with an OEM and with the airworthiness folks with me, and it's the structures guys and the structures guys from this OEM, and I can follow along, but it's like way deep in the weeds and well beyond my level of interest.
Right.
Not necessarily comprehension, but I couldn't keep up with them. If I'm just kind of paying attention to the tenor. That was my role anyway. I wasn't there to talk about it. And then all of a sudden they started talking about von Mises analysis. And so I thought, oh, that's peculiar.
Then you really got distracted.
So then I started looking on my phone, and sure enough, they're brothers. Yeah, they grew up in Austria, and one was more of a mathematician guy, and the other one obviously was an economist. So anyway, back to this. There were, I forget where I was going with it actually. So what I'll do is I'll draw it back to these ideas of the elite trying to do and make things better. How do we make it better? And we have these good intentions to do things. And this is back where it was. Von Hayek, who was a student of von Mises, said the road to hell is paved with good intentions. At least that's what he quoted earlier. Actually, no, wait, he didn't quote that, but he wrote the book called The Road to Serfdom, which is exactly, and that's a great book to read, and I recommend it to the listener. That you have these good ideas, but you're going to lead yourself right into serfdom. Maybe not your generation, but 2-3 generations down the road. And that's what you see throughout history is whenever we start getting these ideas of collectivism, socialism, fascism, communism, National Socialism, any of it, those are collectivist ideas and not individual liberty ideas. Then you run afoul into this, and it's not a slippery slope where you don't end up in communism eventually, but you allow for a totalitarian, a tyranny, a dictator to take over, and that's what you ask for. You get what you ask for.
Indeed. Yeah, I think that it's a historically provable fact that people give up a little bit of their liberty at a time, and for the state to use for good purposes. But then along comes somebody who decides to use it for personal purposes or personal gain or bad purposes.
So let's talk a little bit about that slight change in subject, because there were some key features that were happening, like real features that were happening in the U.S.
right
around the time of Woodrow Wilson. So you have some of that stuff.
Well, I did. So in the news lately has been a lot about the fight against inflation, and the Fed, the Central Bank of the United States, raising interest rates, and what that kind of a domino effect has out through the markets and out through the economy and people's ability to buy homes, for instance, with mortgage rates and that sort of thing. So why do you hate the Fed?
So the Fed is a central bank, and I hold to, I'm not unique in this, that a central bank, if they control the currency, where it should be Congress by the Constitution, but the Congress abdicated that through that legislation that created the Fed. And it's not based on anything real like gold, silver, any kind of precious metal, then they can adjust that money volume, and that becomes, in essence, a tax. Because I could take $1,000 and I put it in a safe, and then 50 years from now, if I have, let's just say we were living with about 3% annual inflation, and let's say for 50 years, that inflation occurs every year. It's 3%, 3%, 3%. Well, over that 50 years, my dollar value has gone down, and essentially I've paid a tax. I have not really saved any money. I've lost money because I can't buy the same things or the same amount of things I could with that $1,000 if I spent it then. So if I would have bought $1,000 worth of, well, let's just say gold, because now I bought gold. Well, now I can take that gold and convert it to something else, and it's now worth more than what my $1,000, which, it just drives me crazy. So anyway, the Fed was a central bank that was created through legislation. We toyed with the idea of central bank. It wasn't the first time we came up with this idea. The central bank took hold right after the revolution, and it kind of was in and out of favor. And then Andrew Jackson wanted to get rid of it.
He did get rid of it.
Yes, he did. He was almost assassinated, I assume, over that.
By a banker.
By a banker. And what's interesting is, so you read a number of quotes that are clearly racist by Woodrow Wilson. But if you were to ask your average person in the U.S., hey, what do you think of Andrew Jackson? Who was better president? Andrew Jackson? Who was more of a racist? Andrew Jackson or Woodrow Wilson? I bet you dollars to donuts people say, well, Andrew Jackson because of Trail of Tears. And I'm not discounting anything that he did that might have been racist, but he fought the central bank because he knew that was a problem, that central banks, they exert control now. That is not control that we the people necessarily, we don't have the same interests. So that's why.
So that's the Fed. I think we also saw in more modern times. Let's go back to COVID. I know nobody likes to talk about that, but
I do.
Nobody likes to listen to you talk about that. Is it?
My family might be tired of it.
You think? Okay. Well, the Fed is because of that central control over currency, and because things have become so digitized and that sort of thing. Is quite able to seize control of a person's assets.
Yes.
And we did actually see that happen during COVID, somewhat in the United States, definitely in Canada.
Yeah.
Same problem, same issues there. But so again, you're abdicating authority to the experts, who are in this case, the expert economists at the Fed. And you're abdicating some of your liberties to them without even necessarily realizing it. So for many, 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 many years, we've had the Fed in place, and it's been a favorite, talking point in Wall Street circles and that sort of thing. It's a political football. But then when the rubber meets the road, and you've got a situation like some unrest or somebody being a dissident to what the federal government wants to have done, one of the powers that they can exert over you is the same sort of power that they're trying to exert over, say, Russia in the sanctions against the war. they are withdrawing your buying power.
Right.
And can easily do that to any citizen of the United States today. And so it doesn't take much of an imagination to think, that power in the wrong hands could be very detrimental to anyone. Somebody who, for instance, sits here and talks about how bad the Fed is.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you another one. Another quick quiz. There were several amendments that were enacted under Woodrow Wilson. Can you tell me what numbers those were?
16, 17, and 18.
All right. Can you tell me what they are? 16?
16, I believe, was the income tax.
I think that's the income tax. 17
was the direct election of senators. Popular election of senators.
And 18 is our favorite.
The prohibition one.
Yeah, we should have a bottle of whiskey out here just for that. But so income tax. I mean, we need taxes to keep our government running.
Yeah, we need roads, right?
We need roads. Yeah.
So
without potholes.
So yeah, what do I have against the income tax? The idea of it was supposed to be temporary, and clearly it's not.
I believe there was a stipulation in there about not more than 4% or something.
Yeah, so, it was nice and small because we fought a war over a 2 or 3% tax on a breakfast beverage. And other things, but so anyway, the income tax, what it's over a period of years, because it wasn't immediately instituted like this, where you don't even see the money. It's now become this drain, where coupled with inflation, where each dollar is worth less, 3% less each succeeding year, 3% at a minimum. And then you throw in income tax. It's no wonder that we can write these multi-billion-dollar checks to Ukraine to fight a war that we have absolutely nothing to do with. And so that idea of the income tax, what it also has done is we become the bill payers directly for any of these things we want, rather than the tariff system that was set up in place before that. So the tariffs did a good job of, and you could, obviously you can make adjustments to them. But those goods that were imported from outside the U.S., they were a tariff was applied. So how's that different? One could argue, well, you're still paying for it. Yes, I'm still paying for it, because if I buy a car and now there's this tariff that Japan has to pay for my truck. Well, I'm going to eat that cost. It's not like the country of Japan is going to eat it. But it's only when I consume something. If I go out and make that purchase, now I'm going to pay that tariff. Most other things, in fact, in a robust nation that has abundant natural resources like the United States, we have, we could grow our own food. We used to make largely our own clothing with a robust clothing industry. The food, the metals, the ores, you name it, we did it all ourselves. And now there's been this push to outsource using cheaper labor rates, or even slave labor rates over in China. That you can't compete for that here. But if you apply that tariff, now you can even those odds. And more people will be prone to buy, quote unquote, buy American and support our jobs, because I'm not paying for that cost of that tariff. So I think tariffs are a good thing to pay for those things that we need to protect our borders, to pay for these functions of government that are like rudimentary functions of government. We could talk about the Department of Education and how that needs to be just completely abolished and bulldozed. And you can reuse the building, for stuff that you can harvest.
Department of Tariffs.
For the Department of Tariffs. The Department of Energy, a lot of those things. And so anyway, back to income tax vice tariffs. I think that's where we're at. And there's a good question. Well, a lot of folks will say, well, what about the roads? Well, we had roads before we had an income tax. How did we pay for that? Well, we paid for it through like local taxes, levies, privatized roads, which some states have dabbled in that a little bit. I think Indiana, I forget his name, Mitch Daniels. Mitch Daniels was the governor. of Indiana for a while, and he privatized certain roads like state highways.
Huh. I'm not familiar with that. That's interesting.
And it can be done. And who better would be more responsive that if I'm the one that raised the revenue and I build this road and there's a pothole, well, now you know who to go to. The other thing is the government doesn't actually build any roads. No. All they do is contract out to some third party. And as you and I both know, the government's not very good at contracting out to third parties.
They're not. And full disclosure, I've spent about the last 25 years working in areas that are closely connected to government contracting. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that, your tax dollars are being spent for sure. Efficiently, not so much. Let's not get carried away. All right. Well, so that's the income tax. So you're an income tax hater.
Yes.
Surely you're not against the people, the will of the people, being able to elect senators to represent them from their states.
Absolutely, I am. And we talked about this on the Constitution one, but I'll double down in case we have a new listener or two.
Second listener.
Second listener. So in the past, it was the senators were set up when this bicameral legislature. One side of that legislature was accountable to the people. So smaller areas of interest. It was, small regions and sectors within each state. And you had your representative that would go to the U.S. House that represented your interests along with the other delegates within, the other representatives rather, within that state. And so if something's really important to us, we call Dale Strong. Hey, I really think we need to do this, and he gets enough action on it, or he comes to us and say, hey, I really think this is a great idea, and he whips up enough support. We go to that. It goes through their committee process, and all those bills of revenue, they originate with the volatile House of Representatives. It should be more volatile. There's a lot more people for one, but they're closer to the people. The damping effect was supposed to be applied by senators. So the senators worked for the state legislatures, and they were selected/elected. I think they could do it different ways. It's always
it was up to the states on how they selected their senators individually, I believe.
Yeah, and so they represented the state at large.
Indeed.
And but it acted as a damping effect to the volatility of the House. And when I say the volatility is this region of Alabama might be really excited about something that the rest of the country, or maybe even the rest of the state, just isn't really interested in. But if enough support and it gets through committee and you have a number of influencers within the House, it's going to happen. You have more influential people than others maybe, and they get the support for something that, hey, the state's got to pay for that somehow. We're going to have to generate revenue to pay for this great idea. And so they would represent the states, and they would dampen that down because they know somebody's got to pay the bill. They weren't elected as frequently, every 6 years. And they also had a different setup for how they ran the Senate.
And so essentially when one senator talked to or negotiated with another senator from a different state, it was essentially the states speaking to each other.
Yes.
On national policy.
Right. And that gave equal voice to the individual states. And there's a lot of value in that. And, you say, I think is Rhode Island or Delaware the smallest landmass state?
Yes.
Okay, one of those. So a super small state, and let's say Texas, that's large, or California. Well, those two senators from Rhode Island or Delaware and the two from California, they hold the same weight and they have the same voice. And what that did was that dampened out anything that might not be an interest to all the states. There might be something that's a regional. All the western states are kind of in favor of this, but none of the other states are interested in it. And it damped out a lot of these crazy ideas. And what you see, the senators now are beholden to the people.
Let me go back before you go there. Another side effect, a positive side effect of that was that a large state like Texas, but a very populous state like California, couldn't bulldoze the East Coast, the much smaller East Coast states,
Right.
And because there was that equal voice in national politics, the larger ones couldn't bulldoze the smaller ones in for crazy ideas or West Coast ideas versus East Coast ideas, that sort of thing. And that was one of the reasons that particular construct for the Senate was in there, was because the smaller colonies, the smaller states, were worried about the bigger states like Virginia imposing their will on them without having any sort of a recourse at the national level.
Mm-hmm.
And so it gave some it gave some real weight. On the other hand, the House of Representatives is theoretically representative of the different concentrations of the population. So you actually have more representatives from the bigger states, and so you have both of those in that original construct. Each of the states is equally represented in the Senate. They are proportionally represented in the House.
Right. Much more granular.
Indeed.
I forget where I was going with that.
So you were starting to break over into now what we see because of the 17th Amendment, whereby.
So now the senators are always seeking individual votes, and so they're looking to promise the same things that the representatives need to promise in order to get elected. And it's really interesting when you couple the proliferation of the 24-hour news cycle and things like C-SPAN. And so what you have are these camera hounds that they just come out and they talk. They do interviews. They say things just so they can be caught on camera saying them things in committee. It just becomes, I call it a joke. It's not governance at all. You even had, he was fairly new senator, I think. He's not a senator anymore. Corey, I forget his last name, from Colorado.
Booker.
No.
Corey Booker.
That's New Jersey.
Okay.
I'll look it up later. If I can get you on a rant later on. So
that shouldn't be hard to do.
Yeah. So he actually said on camera, on one of those, like, just got out of committee, so he's getting interviewed by Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, the usual suspects. And he was actually lamenting that somebody needs to make a law to fix whatever the problem was. He was talking on subject A. Yeah, somebody needs to make a law. Like, you are a legislator. That's your job. Of course, no one's challenging him on that because no one challenges any of this. And I don't mean challenging like yell over them, but like clearly like define, like, are you not representing your state,
ask
sir?
A follow-up question. So obviously that's not what you mean, Senator.
Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Legislator.
Yeah.
So we're beholden, the senators rather, not we, are beholden to those, to get those votes. And there's a whole other slew of things that are wrong with the legislature at large, including these omnibus bills and minibus bills instead of an individual bill. The way the 24-hour news cycle and C-SPAN and on the floors just lend itself to grandstanding instead of actually working together and collaborating to see if they can either start something that should be started or stop something that should be stopped. It just ends up being a show. And I think what we have today is just, it's TV show. It's on many channels. We can all watch it. We can be sickened by it, and we just withdraw and we don't participate in it. And I think that's the problem.